So you all like to say, well, translation of what Jesus said. I'm reading a book right now on whether Jesus spoke Greek. And it's quite interesting. Strong criticism of the Aramaic hypothesis. Not done with it yet, but there's a lot to look at. Because it was just sort of a given in my seminary years. Well, I'm learning more and more that you've got to look at what's a given in those situations. But let's say it was Aramaic. There are a couple places where very obviously, do you really think, ever thought about this one? Do you really think Jesus was speaking to Pilate in Aramaic? You think Pilate would have spoken two languages, Latin and what? Greek. So, given how massive the evidence has become of the predominance of Koine Greek in the homeland of Jesus at the time of Jesus' life, do you really think he didn't know it? What do you think he was doing talking to Pilate? How about remember the woman, the Gentile woman who followed after Jesus? Even the dogs eat the crumbs at the table. Remember her? You think he was, what language do you think he was talking to her in? Anyway, just something to think about.
Jesus spoke Aramaic. My opinion is that he did not know Greek, and that he did not know Latin. I think he probably knew Aramaic. The Gospels are written in Greek, so already when you're reading the Gospels in Greek, you're a step removed from the words of Jesus, assuming that the words that are being recorded are actually words that he said, because they're written 30 or 40 years later, and maybe some of these words weren't things that he actually said. There are sayings in the Gospels that make better sense if you retranslate them into Aramaic from Greek. It's tricky to do. It's fun too. So give you an example. There's a saying that doesn't make very good sense in Mark chapter 2. I'll use the sexist phrasing of this because it's the one people are familiar with, and it's one that it's easier to make my point. Sabbath was made for man, not man for Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Okay? Sounds like familiar. But it doesn't make any sense. Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. What's the therefore? Because it doesn't work. Well, but if you say it in Aramaic, the word for man, meaning human being, and the word for Son of Man is the same word, Barnashah. Sabbath was made for Barnashah, not Barnashah for the Sabbath. Therefore, Barnashah is Lord of the Sabbath. That makes sense. So you retrovert it into Aramaic, and it adds up. And there are other sayings, just as a side. So you need to do that, actually, if you're doing the historical Jesus study. The other side of that is there are some things that cannot be retroverted back into Aramaic, which means Jesus probably didn't say them. Give you a famous example. Every World Series behind home plate, you get somebody holding up a sign, John 3:3. You must be born again. This is a very interesting passage that people holding these signs don't realize the linguistic problems, which is this. When Jesus says this in the Gospel of John, he says, a person must be born anothen to see the kingdom of heaven. Anothen is a Greek word. Now, the word anothen is interesting because it actually has two meanings. It can mean from above, or it can mean a second time. Okay, it means both things. And you have to decide which it means depending on the context. Nicodemus misunderstands what Jesus says. Jesus is saying you have to be born from heaven to see the kingdom of heaven. And Nicodemus thinks, I've got to go crawl back into my mother's womb and be born a second time? And then Jesus corrects his mistake. No. And he tells him what he meant the first time. So the conversation hinges on the double entendre of this word anothen, the Greek word anothen. And you cannot reproduce the double entendre in Aramaic. So the conversation hinges on a particular Greek word that doesn't have a parallel in Aramaic, which means the conversation couldn't have happened like that.
Yeah,
so,
how about Hebrew?
No Hebrew either. Yeah. But they weren't speaking Hebrew in Jesus' day. Jesus probably could read Hebrew, I think, but they weren't. It wasn't a spoken language in Palestine in his time.
And they had, what was the language? What was the native tongue that Jesus spoke 2 millennials ago, 2,000 years ago? Well, Jesus was there, Jesus was in the land of Israel, of course, and he spoke Hebrew. Netanyahu told Pope Francis at a public meeting in Jerusalem yesterday on May 26, 2014, which the Israeli leader cited a strong connection between Judaism and Christianity. The Pope spoke up and said, Aramaic. He spoke Aramaic, but he knew Hebrew. Netanyahu shot back. So quickly, it was quite obvious Jesus did speak Aramaic. The Pope is correct.